This is the Sewing Circle podcast presented by Hanky Code. I'm Rebecca Vanderkoy, here to introduce to you up-and-coming queer artists and the powerful stories behind their work.
Today, I am so excited to introduce all of you to Ava, the founder and editor-in-chief of Ebony Tomatoes Collective, a literary and art magazine by a Black queer collective. Ava, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be back.
Yeah, no, really excited to chat again. So, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what inspired the creation of Ebony Tomatoes Collective.
Yeah, of course. So I started Ebony Tomatoes Collective when I was a junior in college. I was studying film and TV, and my program was not very diverse. So I was writing stories about Blackness, writing stories about queerness, and it felt like I just kept hitting a wall. It felt like my professors and some of my classmates didn't really understand the types of stories I was trying to tell. And it ended up making me feel really isolated. These were like the COVID years, or like the height of the pandemic, so like 2022. So it was an isolating time, and I found myself craving community. I found myself craving connection with writers that looks like me. So what I did one day, I was quarantined with COVID, and I had just like 5 days to myself to think about my life and my woes. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna start a writers group just for Black writers. And at this time, we used the phrase like Black women writers. And so I invited some Black women writers that I knew that were in my classes or I was friends with, and we started getting together every week to just do a writing workshop. And then, as time went on, a few of the people in the writers workshop, including me, were like, wait, what if this was a literary magazine? I know that one of the co-founders named Yumna, I remember she like texted me and was like, wait, like we've been doing this really cool writers group for a couple months. Like, what if we made it into a magazine? And I was like, I was thinking the exact same thing. So then we spent that summer planning, trying to figure out what our niche was going to be. And then that's how Ebony Tomatoes Collective as like a magazine came about.
That's really cool. So, is there any particular piece you've written, whether for Ebony Tomatoes or otherwise, that you're especially proud of?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say two come to mind. One of them is a personal essay that I wrote for Ebony Tomatoes Collective. It was called Why I Can't Justify Gender. It was featured in our issue about the Black lesbian identity and experience. And so it was all about gender and sexuality. And I had written this essay about basically how I came to terms with not only being queer, but being non binary, and like what that actually meant to me and how that manifested for me. I get misgendered quite often. People typically just assume she, her, woman, point blank period. And it's always kind of given me some dysphoric feelings, because I'm like, people don't really see what I'm trying to do or what I am, or how like, yes, maybe I present in a way that is conventionally seen as more feminine, but there's a lot more like understanding and exploration that comes with that identity. And so that's what that personal essay was all about. And I just felt like it was one of my better personal essays. It was very vulnerable, very honest, very long. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I just explored like so many different facets of who I am as a girl and as a boy and as everything in between. And I felt that was really empowering. And then the second, there are two pieces I'm kind of deciding between, of which I'm most proud of. But one of them is a fiction short story that I wrote. It wasn't for Ebony Tomatoes, but it is published in a literary magazine called Expat Press. And it was called Simone Berrigan is Going to Have a Good Day. And it is a satire about a Black corporate worker who's working for a beauty brand and goes to meet her friend for wine after. And it goes horribly wrong because her boss has said that she's like fiscally conservative but socially liberal. And so it's a satire that kind of deals with race, class, corporate culture, beauty brand culture, weirdly enough, and just like
Okay,
hypocrisy
interesting.
that comes with that. It's a weird little story, but I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm like really proud of it. Um, yeah, so those are two, and I can talk about one more if you'd like, but we can also move on. It's too much.
No, that's really cool though. And I also think it's very cool that like you picked two completely different genres. And that is making me wonder, do you have kind of a current favorite genre, or do you like to sort of bounce between things and like with this short story and then also personal essay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Libra, so I'm indecisive and I like everything. Right now, I'm actually working on a fiction collection. So fiction is kind of where I'm focusing my energy, but I also love to write like journalistic pieces, nonfiction, personal essays. I think that there's so many ways to approach the truth of a thing, and sometimes the best way to, if I'm writing about gender and sexuality, I have so many personal experiences with it that a personal essay is more suitable. And for that topic, like I would want to explore it through that lens. But
Yeah.
yeah, but there are also other times where, like in the Simone Berrigan story, I wanted to subvert something. I wanted to make fun of something, and like fiction is a great way to do that, and to really just let your thoughts and opinions like truly have a home and to build a world out of it. So, right now I'm in a fiction era, but I love I love nonfiction as well, and writing like journalistic pieces. I also really like writing profiles on people, and I've written a few really fun profiles this year, and I just love being able to like take uh, an image of a person and kind of give them a vehicle with which to tell their story in a respectful way. So that's really fun for me too.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I think it's great to like not be boxed into just one singular thing. Like kind of being able to have all these tools so however you want to tell a story you can, which is really, really awesome.
Exactly.
Um, so changing gears slightly, this summer your 24th issue of Ebony Tomatoes is being released, I
Yes.
believe. Um, which is very exciting. That's a lot of issues. Of those 24 issues, are there any that like really particularly stand out to you as something you're extra proud of, or there was an aspect of it that you especially liked?
Ooh, that's a great question. I feel like honestly for me, we get better with each issue. Um, so our last issue, which was 23rd issue, was called Against the Tide: Community Care and the Collapse of Empire. And I really loved that one because it felt so relevant. It felt so important to the time and in which we live. It's basically all about community organizing and grassroots activism outside of government institutions or structures. I think a really big thing to note about, for me as like a leftist and as a writer, is that the goal the goal with activism as a whole is not just to critique existing systems, but it's to compete with existing systems and create new ones that serve the people in a better, more equitable way. So it's kind of this element of like, okay, what new things are we creating? What new stories are we able to tell in the wake of so much catastrophe? So this was created on the eve of the 2024 election. For a bulk of the time we were creating it, we were like leading up to the election, and then I think it came out shortly after Trump was elected. And I think it's really special to me because our team, who lives in different parts of the country, went to their local communities and interviewed community organizers in their community. So for me, I was actually on a 2 month long road trip with my girlfriend while I was doing this issue.
Oh wow.
Yeah, a lot of it was for me done like in a car. And I took a road, we drove from New York to California, and on the way there, we stopped in New Mexico, and I got to interview the executive director of a land trust in New Mexico, who was basically in like protecting acres and acres of land in New Mexico for small farmers and for farm education, and to give like the tools of food sovereignty back to the indigenous and people of color community that had always lived in New Mexico. And I thought that was such an incredible story, and I like loved writing that. Another one of our writers interviewed the founder of the Free Black Women's Library, which is based in Bed-Stuy, and she's doing a lot of great work there, creating like a free and accessible third space for events for Black folks to come in and read without having to pay any money, without cost being a barrier. And so I think it kind of gave a really interactive and accessible blueprint for like the types of things that people are doing, where it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
we know the grocery is expensive. We know that there's a housing crisis. Like, what do we actually do? What institutions can we either create or support in order to do that work? And I thought that was really cool that we were able to talk about it in that issue.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think even just the fact of like getting to interview and talk to and spotlight a wide range of people all over the country
Hmm.
is such like a powerful thing because then it is like, look, these are people who are already doing this. Like these are people you can look to, like you were saying, whether it's like to model something after or to support them. Like there are people who are doing this work and it's really exciting to be able to show people what's going on.
Absolutely.
Um, so with Ebony Tomatoes, what would you kind of say your overarching vision or goal has been since you guys began?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, I think so much, honestly. I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about like competing with existing systems that don't serve us. The journalism media industry as a whole is very white, very straight, very all of the things that we already know. And so, like, there was a study done in 2024, I believe, that said 78% of publishing executives are white, and I think over 70% of like employees in publishing are also white by a grand majority. And this is like a couple of years ago. If you want to check, I believe it was done by, believe the study was done by Lee and Low, but I can send you the link to that because I do have it somewhere.
Okay.
But long story short, the industry of who's deciding what stories are told, the gatekeepers of words in our current system are some of the most privileged people in our society. And I just didn't think that was right. And I definitely see that reflected in the types of stories that are told. And even putting race and class aside, um, there's this kind of trend in journalism where it's like we want fast stories, we want breaking news, we want what's hot, we want what's interesting. And a lot of the times, the more slow stories, the stories that aren't necessarily breaking news but are ongoing struggles for liberation, are kind of pushed, are kind of funneled out because it might not sell, right? The consumers don't want it. And like they're working with, they're publishing corporations or journalism corporations who have to make these tough calls. But unfortunately, because of the way that so many industries now are set up, there's a lot of barriers to entry to creating something like a literary magazine, to creating something that can be widely distributed across the country that doesn't have those parameters, that doesn't have those like colonial rules where it's like, if it doesn't sell, it's not getting printed. So I thought that that was problematic, and I saw a lack of queer, indigenous, and black stories that weren't just about the trauma, weren't just about like the breaking news and the worst thing ever that's ever happened like on page. Like
Hmm.
there's so much more to our experience, there's so much more to our freedom and like what it takes for us to get free. And I wanted to create a platform where we could tell those stories and where like writers who wanted to talk about something like that could actually have a chance at being published, because all writers know no matter what, you could be like the best, most privileged writer and you're still going to get rejected. It's just a part of being a writer, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that sense of rejection is even more exacerbated the more marginalized you are, because like a lot of publishers and storytellers still view diversity as like a box that can be filled and can be shut once it's filled,
Yep.
which is not the case at all. There's such a breadth and depth of storytelling that can happen, and the key to our freedom is is printing those stories. The Black Panther Party had a magazine that circulated hundreds and thousands of copies at its height. And so that was a really important point, a really important part of not only their theory, but their practice in serving their community and bringing the news and bringing the stories from the people to the people. So that's really my overarching goal here with Ebony Tomatoes, where my goal is to create a self sustaining publication and collective where organizers, artists, activists, and writers can come together and have a place to do the work and tell the stories that are needed to change our circumstances and improve our lived experiences.
Yeah, no, that's like such an important mission and important platform. You guys are putting out amazing
Thank you.
work. Um, so what would you say, what lessons have you learned since it's been a few years now since you started creating Ebony Tomatoes. So I'm wondering, what have you learned along the way?
So much, so much since we last talked. Because you're one of the, I think you were the first person who ever interviewed us. So
Oh,
I
wow.
know. Yeah,
Amazing.
so thank you for seeing the vision. Early.
No, of course. I've loved your stuff and I've been reading along ever since.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I've learned so much. I think the biggest thing that I have learned is that so much of this work is like relationship based. Personally, I do not consider myself a people person. So when I first started, I kind of tried to be like avoid meetings and try to do a lot of stuff on my own or just like with the people I was already comfortable with. But I think a lot of the growth that Ebony Tomatoes has experienced over the past couple of actually maybe just like the last year specifically has been because we have taken the leap to collaborate with other collectives, with other journalists. And it really takes kind of like putting yourself out there and being like, hey, would you want to feature us? Would you want to collaborate? Would you want to just talk to me about how you run your literary magazine? Specifically, I remember there is an LA based literary magazine called Dream World Girlzine, and I've been like lurking, kind of like loving their stuff for months and like kind of wanting to have a better idea of like how they were growing an audience, how they were doing this. And I felt kind of shy and nervous about it and like just kind of watched from afar. And then I was talking to my mom and I was like explaining like, oh, I don't know what the next step should be for Ebony Tomatoes. I don't know what to do. And she was like, well, why don't you just talk to some people who are doing the things that you want to be doing? Like just reach out and talk to them. And I was like, wow, never thought of that. Never thought of that.
yeah.
But then I ended up talking to the founder and editor in chief of Dream World Girlzine. Her name is Daphne. She's incredible. And now we have a relationship. We did a collaborative photo shoot in Los Angeles with Isabel, who's our LA coordinator for Ebony Tomatoes. And so if I hadn't had reached out and had that initial conversation with Daphne, none of that would have happened. We wouldn't have had a presence in LA. I wouldn't have been connected with Isabel, who's doing a lot of cool work with us in Los Angeles. Um, Similarly, I have a very good friend named Nia who has a podcast called The Glass Closet. And she invited me on there, and we talked about Ebony Tomatoes, race, class, similar things. And it ended up going viral and bringing a lot of people to the Ebony Tomatoes platform. So I couldn't have done it without other Black people, specifically Black femmes, who saw the vision, supported what we were doing, and offered their time and their platform and their expertise to Ebony Tomatoes Collective. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think the biggest thing that's really taught me is like you can't really do it by yourself. And you
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
you just shouldn't, especially with something like a collective. I think there are certain things where, like, as a writer, as a paint, honestly, every type of art should be collaborative. It's best when you have other people giving insight. Another thing that I learned is that running a literary magazine to this capacity is absolutely a lot of work. It's at least a part-time job for me. I put hours in literally every day to keep it running. And
Yeah.
yes, so recently we put out a call because we're doing a paid newsletter, and that caused me to grapple a lot with it. And I had like, I didn't want to ask people for money. I didn't want to ask people for help. I was just like, I can do it. And my girlfriend was like, no, like, you were putting so much work in. Everyone in the collective is putting so much work in. Like, sometimes you really do need to ask for help and ask your audience to support you, especially if you're putting out work so consistently the way we are. Like, I think sometimes, at least for me, I can kind of fall into like a self sacrificial rut where I'm like, I don't need help. I'm just going to suffer and I'm going to do it. And it's not
Yeah.
sustainable. It's not like there's no sacredness to it. Like, you really just got to ask for what you need, is really the biggest thing.
No, I think that's really good advice. And even just like the kind of not being scared to like look to people who are doing what you want to be doing. I feel like that is such good advice because it can be so scary to reach out to someone and be like, oh my goodness, what if they don't want to talk to me? But also like the everything about collaborating with others and like seeing what other people are doing, like nothing bad is going to come out of
No,
that.
no. I also think like we can get into I see this less with writers because it's known that all of us are struggling and trying our best. So I feel like for the most part, like all the literary magazines we've worked with have been like so lovely and just rays of light and hope. But I think more broadly in creative spaces, there can be a sense of competition where it's like we're looking at the follower count, we're looking at how much traction things get, like, and we are stronger together. There's a really big DIY publishing, writing scene, anywhere from literary magazines that are just starting by students to like indie publishing houses, which I can talk a little bit more about. But there's a really large scene of people who are doing this and like creating institutions to publish writers and get stories out there. So, it's better to have a collaborative mindset as opposed to a competitive mindset, because you're coming from a place of lack when you're competing, whereas collaborating, you're just seeing what you can give each other, which I think is a much better way to do things.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I also think like it's such an amazing thing and so important, like indie publishers from all areas, whether it's like, magazine or like digital stuff or like fully like book publishing, all of that is so important. Kind of going back to what you were saying before, because like, especially now with what journalism has become in a lot of ways, like so much of it is very like clicks driven and driven on like, okay, what's sensational so we can get attention to it. So I think like it's so important now more than ever to be having these other avenues where like stories in a wide range of forms can be put out that are maybe not as focused on those things.
Exactly. And I also think, like, I completely agree. And I also think that a lot of that is because a lot of the big newspapers and magazines that exist are owned by corporations and billionaires. And it's in their interest to not publish certain
Exactly.
things. Yeah, because the Washington Post is owned by Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Like, of course, they're not going to be having this sort of discussion around politics that's completely uncensored, right? But if you're a smaller guy and you're grassroots, you can recruit some people who can say whatever they want, because you're
Exactly.
not being held to a corporate overlord. And so I think as people who read and as an audience, like I think it's really important to be mindful like where you're getting your news and have a really good variety of like, yeah, we can read the New York Times, you can read the Washington Post, you can read Wall Street Journal, but what else are you reading that's actually from the people who are actually from the ground?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And also there is like freedom with like you actually have so much more ability to like address different things and put stuff out that like whether these other places, maybe there might be someone over there who really wants to put something out, but like it's going to get shut down. And on a smaller scale, you don't have to worry about that.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I mentioned you have a new issue coming out. I'm curious, what can you say about that?
I'm so excited for this. It's gonna be so good. When you asked me like what my favorite issue is, like I was tempted to say this one, but I'm like it does not even exist yet, so let me not. Um,
Fair
yeah,
enough.
so this issue is about grief. That's the theme. I think that as marginalized people, specifically Black people from across the diaspora, there's so much grief that we carry and so much grief that we inherit, so much that we mourn. Even the idea of being a people of a diaspora, for me, I am African American on my mom's side, right? But specifically African American, where it's like I don't really have a like origin necessarily, because my ancestors were taken from West Africa, brought to the US, but that happened centuries ago. So there's a sort of mourning that I feel in this generation, being American, being Black, and being like, where is my home? Kind of a spiritual sort of displacement that manifests as a internal mourning that can't really be fully ever grappled with because the story is so much bigger than me. So it's this type of thinking that led to us to create an issue specifically on grief and the various ways that it manifests throughout the Black experience. So it's the three editors are me and my very good friends Cecilia and Yumna, and we've been going through these submissions. We also have two other editors who are contributing to this issue, Laisa and Stacy, so shout out to them. Um, but yeah, we are kind of exploring like unconventional types of grief. So a lot of the stories we have are like the grief of being queer and your parents not accepting you because they come from like a conservative Black or African household. And like, what does that feel like to go no contact with your family due to queerness? I mean, that's a loss, that's a grief that you carry. Um, let's see, another type of grief that we're talking about is just the grief of like I'm trying to go through all the pieces in my head mentally, trying to remember the grief of like ancestors who you don't know, who have already passed and who live inside of you, but you don't know their stories. You don't know how they cooked. You don't know what their voices sounded like, because as Black people, we don't have that record of like our heritage in the same way that a lot of other groups do, specifically African American people. Like a lot, so much is lost to us. Um, and most interestingly, from this issue, we are featuring our first non Black writer, who is a Lebanese writer who is writing about the grief of being bombed by Israel and the grief of living in an active war zone and what that feels like in the body and how that manifests, which is an incredible, incredible story. And we had a long conversation about, okay, are we going to accept a non-Black writer, because that's kind of like our whole platform. But given the genocide that's happening in Palestine, and given all of the war crimes that the state of Israel is committing, we felt like it was a really important and relevant story to be telling and to be printing. And that's kind of like another what I mean, where it's like maybe there are some other publications who absolutely would not greenlight that story, and not necessarily greenlight something that is like talks about the politics, but also talks about the personal, spiritual, somatic experience of what it feels like to have you and your family be airstriked, So that's kind of like how we want to use our platform to talk about grief in those ways. Also, the grief of assault, of harassment from a young age, that is being explored in one of the essays in our piece. So there's just so much. It's a heavy issue. Multiple of the pieces like literally made me cry. And there's just so many things. A couple of our pieces are actually also about the grief of gentrification. So growing up in New York or Southern California and watching your home slowly change and kind of be taken away by the rivers of this new sort of colonization and how that feels. So it's been an absolutely incredible experience to see all the different ways that people interpret grief and like what they carry with them. And it's such an honor to be able to edit this work. It's like, I'm just so excited for it to come out. I can't even tell you. And also I would say the caliber of the writing absolutely blew us away. Like,
Yeah.
I'm picky. I'm picky. Like, I would not say that if it weren't true, but like this writing is out of the water. I just feel really lucky that these writers trusted us with this stuff, because I'm like, wow, this could have gone anywhere, but thank you for choosing us.
Yeah, no, that all sounds like so powerful. And I think grief is such a universal experience in that like everyone has had grief touch them in some
Yeah.
way. And so even if these exact experiences, someone picks up this magazine, maybe it's not their exact experience, I think like there will be a hint of understanding, but also learning and like having your worldview expand a little, which I think both of those things are super
Absolutely.
important. And I, for one, cannot wait to pick up a copy. Which, speaking of, when is it coming out?
It'll be coming out like late July, early August. So we're in the
Okay.
editing process right now. We have an amazing illustrator who's working on it. So before the end of the summer, it will be out. So I'm super excited for that. So stay tuned. I'll post it on all the socials and all the things and all that.
Okay, amazing. I will keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Can't wait to pick up this latest magazine once it's out. I've been loving all of your stuff. The work you guys do is amazing. To anyone listening, if you haven't read anything by Ebony Tomatoes, you absolutely want to check it out. They are putting out some really high quality stuff.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.